Imagine a desperate mother-to-be, a pregnant pit bull, knocking on a stranger's window for 12 hours straight. Her cries were filled with urgency, her strength fading by the minute. When someone finally opened that window, what they discovered was far more than they expected. This is a story of courage, survival, and an unbreakable bond between a pit bull and the human who saved her. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us share more inspiring stories like this with you. It was a cold, gray morning in a small suburban neighborhood. Rain drizzled steadily, creating tiny rivers that trickled down the streets. Inside her modest home, 30-year-old Emily Thompson sat by her kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee as she scrolled through her phone. A teacher at the local elementary school, Emily was used to calm mornings like this before heading off to work. But this morning, something was different. A faint, tapping sound interrupted her thoughts. At first, she ignored it, dismissing it as the rain hitting the windows. But the tapping grew louder, more persistent. She frowned and stood, walking toward the living room window. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. A pit bull, soaked to the bone and visibly pregnant, stood outside, her paw raised as she knocked repeatedly on the glass. Her eyes were wide with desperation, and her trembling body told a story of exhaustion and fear. Emily's heart pounded. She had always loved animals, but had never seen anything like this. The dog looked as though she had been through a storm, not just the rain outside, but a storm of life's cruelties. Her ribs were faintly visible beneath her wet coat, and her swollen belly confirmed she was nearing the end of her pregnancy. "She's asking for help," Emily whispered to herself, her voice shaking. Without hesitation, she grabbed a towel and opened the front door. The pit bull staggered slightly as Emily approached her. "Hey, girl," Emily said softly, crouching down. "It's okay. You're safe now." The dog hesitated, her eyes flicking between Emily and the door, as if begging her to understand the urgency. Emily gently reached out, and the pit bull lowered her head, allowing her to wrap the towel around her. As Emily led her into the house, she noticed something strange. The dog wasn't just seeking shelter. She seemed agitated, glancing back toward the window and letting out soft whines. "What is it?" Emily asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. Once inside, Emily dried the dog off and gave her a bowl of water. The pit bull drank greedily, her tail wagging faintly, but she didn't settle. Instead, she kept pacing near the window, occasionally scratching at the glass. Emily knelt beside her, running a hand over her damp fur. "Are you trying to tell me something?" she murmured. The dog responded with a low whine, pressing her nose to the window. Suddenly it clicked. "You're not just here for yourself, are you?" Emily said, her voice rising with realization. "You've got something, or someone, out there." Emily's mind raced. Was it possible this dog had come to her for help, not just for shelter, but to save someone else? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She grabbed her coat and boots, turning to the dog. "Show me," she said. The pit bull seemed to understand. She moved to the door, glancing back at Emily, as if urging her to follow. Emily quickly grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the rain soaking through her jacket almost immediately. The dog led her down the street, her pace quick despite her obvious exhaustion. They walked for nearly 10 minutes, the pit bull stopping occasionally to look back and make sure Emily was still following. Finally, they reached an overgrown lot at the edge of the neighborhood. The dog paused, her body tense, and let out a low bark. Emily shone her flashlight into the lot, and her heart broke at what she saw. A makeshift shelter made of cardboard and old blankets sat in the corner, and beneath it were 3 tiny puppies, barely a few days old. They were shivering, their cries weak against the sound of the rain. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she realized the full weight of what had happened. This mother had spent hours knocking on her window, not for herself, but for her babies. She had braved the storm, her pregnant body pushed to its limits, to find someone who could help save her little ones. Emily didn't hesitate. She scooped up the puppies, wrapping them in her scarf, and turned to the mother. "Let's get them home," she said softly. The pit bull's tail wagged slightly, her eyes filled with gratitude. Back at the house, Emily carefully dried off the 3 tiny puppies and their brave mother. The living room was warm, the faint scent of lavender from a candle filling the air, but the tension in Emily's chest hadn't eased. The pit bull, who Emily had started calling Hope, lay curled up on a pile of blankets Emily had hastily arranged on the floor. Her large belly rose and fell as she breathed, her eyes flicking anxiously between Emily and her puppies. The puppies were tiny, their fragile bodies trembling as they nestled into the warmth of their mother. Emily placed a small bowl of milk nearby, hoping it would help them regain some strength. She watched as Hope gently nudged her babies closer, her maternal instincts shining through despite her obvious exhaustion. "You're incredible, you know that?" Emily said softly, crouching down to stroke Hope's head. The dog leaned into her touch, letting out a soft sigh. As the rain continued to pour outside, Emily couldn't help but wonder what Hope had been through. It was clear she hadn't been cared for in a long time. Her thin frame, the scars on her legs, and her desperate actions told a story of hardship and survival. But the biggest question gnawed at Emily's mind. Who had abandoned a pregnant dog and her puppies? Emily grabbed her phone and began scrolling through local animal rescue groups. She posted a picture of Hope and the puppies, explaining the situation and asking if anyone knew where they might have come from. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. "She looks familiar. Wasn't there a pit bull reported missing a few weeks ago? This is heartbreaking. You're an angel for helping her. There's a man in the area known for dumping dogs when they're no longer useful. Could be him." Emily's stomach turned as she read the last comment. The idea that someone could see an animal as disposable was incomprehensible to her. She replied to the comment, asking for more information, but received no immediate response. The night passed slowly. Emily slept on the couch close to Hope and the puppies, in case they needed anything. Every few hours, Hope would nudge one of her babies or shift positions to keep them warm. Emily couldn't stop marveling at the strength and love this dog had for her little ones, even after everything she had endured. By morning, the rain had stopped, and a faint sunlight peeked through the curtains. Emily was scrolling through her messages when a notification popped up. It was from one of the commenters on her post. "I think the man you're looking for is Jake Turner. He's been reported multiple times for abandoning dogs, but nothing ever sticks because he's careful not to leave evidence. He lives on the outskirts of town near the old mill." Emily's hands shook as she read the message. If this Jake Turner was responsible for abandoning Hope and her puppies, she couldn't just let it go, but confronting someone like that wasn't something she could do alone. She picked up her phone and called her friend Sarah, who volunteered at an animal rescue. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hey, Emily, what's up?" Emily quickly explained the situation, her voice filled with urgency. "I need your help, Sarah. If this guy really did this to Hope, we need to make sure he doesn't hurt any other dogs." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm with you. Let's gather some evidence and get the authorities involved. But be careful, okay? People like him can be dangerous." Emily glanced at Hope, who was watching her intently as if sensing the tension. "Don't worry," Emily said softly. "We'll be careful, and we'll make sure he pays for what he's done." That afternoon, Emily and Sarah met at a coffee shop to plan their next steps. They decided to visit the area near the old mill to see if they could find any signs of other abandoned animals or evidence that could tie Jake Turner to Hope's case. Sarah also promised to contact a local animal control officer she knew, hoping to bring in some backup. When Emily returned home, she found Hope standing by the window, her tail wagging faintly. The sight brought a smile to her face. "You're safe now," she said, kneeling beside her, "and I'm going to make sure no one ever hurts you or your babies again." Emily stared at the message on her phone, her pulse quickening. The words seemed to jump off the screen. "Stay out of it, if you know what's good for you." Her stomach churned as she realized someone knew she was digging into Hope's past. Was it Jake Turner? Or someone trying to protect him? Hope, sensing Emily's unease, patted over and rested her head on Emily's lap. Her warm, trusting eyes reminded Emily why she couldn't back down. "It's okay, girl," she whispered, stroking the dog's head. "We're not going to let anyone scare us." She forwarded the message to Sarah, who called her almost immediately. "Emily, this is serious," Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. "If someone's threatening you, we need to be extra careful." "Did the message come from a real account?" "No," Emily replied. "It was anonymous, but it's enough to make me think we're onto something." Sarah sighed. "Let's stick to the plan. We'll head out to the old mill tomorrow and see what we can find. But promise me you'll stay safe tonight. Lock your doors and don't go anywhere alone." "I promise," Emily said, though the knot in her stomach remained. That night, Emily double-checked the locks on her doors and windows before settling on the couch with Hope and her puppies. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of the wind outside. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, but she told herself it was just her nerves. As she sat there, Hope rested her head on Emily's lap, her breathing slow and steady. Emily looked down at the dog, marveling at her resilience. Despite everything she had been through, Hope still trusted humans. That trust was something Emily couldn't betray. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Emily's house bright and early. She had brought supplies, flashlights, gloves, and a camera to document anything they found near the mill. "Are you ready?" she asked. Emily nodded, glancing at Hope, who was lying protectively beside her puppies. "I'll be back soon," she told the dog, giving her a reassuring pat. The drive to the old mill was tense. The road was long and winding, lined with dense trees that seemed to close in as they got closer. The mill itself was a crumbling structure at the edge of a muddy lot. It looked abandoned, but something about it felt off. As they stepped out of the car, Sarah pointed to a chain-link fence surrounding the property. "Look at that," she said. "There are fresh tire tracks in the mud. Someone's been here recently." Emily's heart raced as they moved closer. The property was eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of birds. Near the fence they spotted a pile of old crates. Emily bent down to examine them and froze. Inside one of the crates were scraps of fabric and empty food cans. "Someone's been keeping animals here," she said, her voice trembling. Sarah took pictures of the scene, her expression grim. "This is enough to report to animal control. Let's keep looking." As they moved toward the mill, Emily spotted something that made her blood run cold, a collar lying in the dirt. It was worn and frayed, but the name tag was still legible. It read, "Hope." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "This is hers," she whispered. "This is where they left her." Sarah placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "We'll make sure they can't do this to any other dog," she said firmly. Suddenly the sound of an engine roared in the distance. Emily and Sarah ducked behind a stack of crates as a truck pulled onto the property. A man stepped out, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He looked around suspiciously before walking toward the mill. "That must be him," Sarah whispered. Emily's heart pounded as she watched the man disappear into the building. Every instinct told her to leave, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that other animals might still be inside. "We need to call animal control," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. But before she could dial, the man reappeared, holding a large bag that he tossed into the back of the truck. He glanced around the property again before driving off, the tires kicking up mud as he sped away. Once the truck was out of sight, Emily and Sarah made their way into the mill. The air inside was damp and stale, and the floor was littered with debris. In the corner, they found several empty cages, their rusted bars a haunting reminder of what had once been there. Emily's chest tightened as she imagined Hope trapped in one of those cages, her puppies born into such a cruel environment. She clenched her fists, a surge of determination washing over her. "We have to stop him," she said. Emily's breath hitched as the sound of the truck's engine grew louder. The man was coming back, and they were still inside the mill. She turned to Sarah, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to hide." Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. The two women ducked behind a stack of old crates near the back of the building, their hearts pounding in unison. The faint whimpering Emily had heard earlier still lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder that there could be more animals in need of help. The truck's headlights pierced through the dusty windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. The engine cut off, and the sound of boots crunching against gravel followed. Emily peeked through a gap in the crates and saw the man from earlier stepping into the building. "Where are you, little troublemaker?" the man muttered, his voice gruff and laced with irritation. He carried a flashlight, its beam sweeping across the floor. Emily and Sarah exchanged a glance, their fear mounting. Who was he talking to? Was there still an animal here, hiding in the shadows? The man moved deeper into the mill, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Emily clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. They couldn't leave. Not yet. If there were animals still trapped here, they had to find them. As the man disappeared into another room, Emily whispered to Sarah, "We have to check that corner. That's where I heard the whimpering." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we have to be quick." The two women crept out from behind the crates, their movements silent as they made their way to the far corner of the mill. There, hidden behind a pile of debris, they found a small cage. Inside was a terrified dog, a young pit bull with patches of fur missing and eyes wide with fear. Emily's heart broke at the sight. "It's okay," she whispered, reaching through the bars to touch the dog gently. "We're here to help." The dog flinched at first, but then leaned into Emily's hand, a flicker of trust in its eyes. Sarah began working on the latch, which was rusted and difficult to open. Come on," Sarah muttered, her hands trembling. Just as the latch gave way, the sound of footsteps returned. The man was coming back. Emily and Sarah froze, their eyes locking in panic. They couldn't leave the dog, but there was no time to hide. "What the hell are you doing here?" the man barked, his flashlight beam landing on them. Emily stood protectively in front of the cage, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We're taking this dog. You have no right to keep her like this." The man's expression twisted with anger. "You don't know what you're messing with, lady. Get out of here before you regret it." Sarah stepped forward, her phone in hand. "We've already called animal control. They're on their way. If you try anything, you'll have to answer to them." The man hesitated, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, Emily thought he might lash out. But then he spat on the ground and stepped back. "Fine. Take the mutt. She's no use to me anyway." He stormed out of the building, slamming the door behind him. Emily and Sarah wasted no time. They scooped up the scared pit bull and carried her out to their car, their adrenaline still pumping. As they drove away from the mill, Emily glanced at the dog who was curled up in Sarah's lap. "You're safe now," she said softly. "We'll make sure no one ever hurts you again." Back at her house, Emily gently set the newly rescued pit bull down on a soft blanket near Hope and her puppies. The young dog was still trembling, her thin frame showing signs of malnourishment. Emily noticed how Hope immediately took notice of her, wagging her tail slightly as if offering reassurance. It was a quiet yet powerful moment, the two dogs bonding through their shared resilience. As Emily began to clean the new dog with a warm, damp cloth, she noticed something unusual. Just behind the dog's ear, barely visible beneath the patchy fur, was a faint but distinct mark, a brand. It looked like a combination of letters and numbers, crudely burned into the skin. Emily's stomach churned as she traced it with her fingers. "What is this?" she muttered, her voice tinged with unease. Sarah, who was helping settle the dogs, leaned in to take a look. Her eyes widened. "That's not just a random mark," she said. "It looks like some kind of identifier, almost like she was part of a system." Emily's mind raced. She had heard of illegal operations that used brands to track animals, dogfighting rings, underground breeders, and other cruel industries that treated animals as commodities. The thought made her blood boil. "I think this is bigger than we realized," Emily said, her voice firm. "That man at the mill, he wasn't just neglecting these dogs. He's part of something much darker." Sarah nodded, her face pale. "If this is connected to dogfighting or illegal breeding, we need to report it immediately. That mark could be evidence." Emily took pictures of the brand and sent them to the animal control officer Sarah had contacted earlier. Then, she wrapped the young pit bull in a blanket and held her close. "We'll get you out of this nightmare," she whispered. "I promise." As the night wore on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The brand was a clue, but it also felt like a warning. Whoever was behind this operation wouldn't take kindly to outsiders interfering. She glanced at her front door, double-checking that it was locked. The next morning, the animal control officer, Lisa Grant, arrived at Emily's house. Lisa was a no-nonsense woman with years of experience handling cases of neglect and abuse. She examined the rescued dog carefully, her expression grim. "This brand is consistent with what we've seen in dogfighting rings," Lisa said. "It's a way for them to track their property. It also means there are likely more dogs out there trapped in horrible conditions." Emily's heart sank. "How do we stop them?" Lisa sighed. "It's not easy. These operations are often well hidden and heavily guarded. But this brand gives us a lead. If we can trace it back to the group behind this, we might be able to shut them down." Hope and the new dog watched from their corner of the room as Lisa spoke. It was as if they understood the gravity of the situation, their eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Do you think that man at the mill is connected to this ring?" Emily asked. Lisa nodded. "It's very likely, but we'll need more evidence to link him directly. Did you see anything else while you were there?" Emily described the cages, the debris, and the man's behavior. Lisa took notes, her expression hardening with every detail. "This is enough to get a warrant to search the property," she said. "But we'll need to act fast. If he knows we're onto him, he might try to move the dogs, or worse." As Lisa prepared to leave, she placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "You did the right thing, calling this in. These dogs have a chance because of you." After Lisa left, Emily sat on the floor with Hope, the puppies, and the newly rescued dog, who she decided to call Grace. Despite everything they had been through, the dogs were beginning to show signs of hope. Grace wagged her tail faintly as she nuzzled against Hope, and the puppies playfully climbed over both of them. But Emily knew the fight wasn't over. That brand was a reminder of the cruelty these dogs had endured and the danger that still loomed. She couldn't let fear stop her from doing what was right. Emily gripped her phone tightly as Lisa's voice came through the line. "The ring is tied to a man named Jake Turner," Lisa said. "It's the same man you encountered at the mill." The name hit Emily like a brick. She had suspected he was involved in something sinister, but hearing confirmation made her stomach churn. "How long has he been doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Years," Lisa replied. "He's been reported before, but he's careful, always covering his tracks and avoiding prosecution. This time, though, we have something solid: the brand, the photos from the mill, and your testimony." Emily's mind raced as she pieced everything together. Jake Turner wasn't just neglecting dogs. He was running an operation that exploited and abused them. And Hope, Grace, and countless others had suffered because of him. "What happens now?" Emily asked. Lisa's tone was firm. "We're coordinating with local law enforcement. A raid is being planned for tomorrow night. But Emily, you need to stay out of this. These people can be dangerous." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to listen, to stay safe at home with Hope and Grace. But another part of her, a stronger, fiercer part, knew she couldn't just sit back and wait. She had seen the horrors these dogs endured, and she felt a responsibility to help. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay on the couch, Hope curled up beside her, and Grace resting near the puppies. The peaceful scene was a stark contrast to the darkness they had escaped. Emily stroked Hope's fur, her mind heavy with thoughts of the dogs still trapped in Jake's operation. As the hours passed, Emily made a decision. She would follow Lisa's advice and let the authorities handle the raid, but she would be ready to step in if needed. She couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. The next day, Emily busied herself caring for the dogs. Grace had begun to relax, her tail wagging more often, and Hope seemed to sense that her new friend needed extra comfort. Watching the two dogs bond gave Emily a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just helping them, they were helping her too. By evening, Lisa called again. "The raid is happening tonight," she said. "We have a warrant and a team ready to move in. I'll keep you updated." Emily's heart pounded as she hung up. She paced the living room, unable to sit still. Her phone buzzed with updates from Sarah, who had also been in touch with Lisa. "They're heading to the mill now," one text read. "Fingers crossed they get everyone out safely." An hour later, Emily received a call. It was Lisa, and her voice was tense. "We've hit a complication," she said. "Jake wasn't at the mill, but we found evidence of a larger facility outside the city. We're heading there now, but it's going to take time to mobilize." Emily's heart sank. Jake was always one step ahead. "Do you need help?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "No," Lisa said firmly. "Stay where you are. We'll handle this." But as Emily ended the call, something didn't sit right with her. She thought about the brand on Grace's ear and the fear she had seen in Jake's eyes when she confronted him. He wasn't just running from the law. He was hiding something big. Emily grabbed her jacket and keys. "I can't just sit here," she said to Hope, who tilted her head as if she understood. "I'll be careful. I promise." Driving toward the mill, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she trusted her instincts. Jake's operation was bigger than anyone had realized, and she was determined to find the truth. When she arrived, the area was eerily quiet. The mill was empty, but fresh tire tracks in the mud suggested Jake had been there recently. Emily followed the tracks, her headlights cutting through the darkness as she drove toward the outskirts of town. Finally, she saw it. A large, dilapidated barn hidden behind a row of trees. The sight sent a chill down her spine. This was it. She parked her car a safe distance away and approached on foot, her flashlight illuminating the path. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, many of them empty, but some still holding dogs. Their eyes glistened in the dim light, a mix of hope and despair. Emily's throat tightened as she approached the cages. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm going to get you out of here." But before she could do anything, the sound of a door creaking open made her freeze. She turned to see Jake standing in the doorway, a cruel smile on his face. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Emily's heart pounded as Jake stepped closer, his shadow looming over her in the dimly lit barn. The dogs in the cages began to whimper and bark, sensing the tension. Emily clenched her fists, trying to appear braver than she felt. "You really should have minded your own business," Jake sneered, his voice cold. "Do you have any idea what you've just walked into?" Emily's voice shook, but she stood her ground. "I know exactly what this is," she said. "You've been running an operation built on cruelty, and it ends tonight." Jake laughed, a harsh, menacing sound. "And you're going to stop me? Look around. You're alone, and no one's coming to save you." But Jake was wrong. Outside the barn, Hope had followed Emily's scent, her instincts leading her to the danger her rescuer now faced. The rain-soaked ground didn't slow her down as she approached the barn, her ears perked and her senses sharp. She paused at the entrance, her keen eyes catching the sight of Emily and the man threatening her. Inside, Emily tried to stall Jake. "The authorities know about you," she said, her voice steadier now. "They're on their way. You won't get away with this." Jake's expression darkened. "We'll see about that," he growled, stepping toward her. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the barn. Both Emily and Jake turned toward the entrance just as Hope charged in, her powerful frame cutting through the shadows. She stopped in front of Emily, her body positioned protectively between her and Jake. Jake's eyes widened. "What the?" Hope didn't wait for him to finish. With a fierce bark, she lunged at Jake, forcing him to stumble backward. Emily watched in awe and fear as Hope stood her ground, her growls deep and unrelenting. Jake tried to regain his composure, but Hope's presence had clearly shaken him. He backed toward the door, his confidence crumbling. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice wavering. He turned and bolted out of the barn, disappearing into the night. Emily rushed to Hope, dropping to her knees to hug the dog tightly. "You saved me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're amazing." Hope wagged her tail, her fierce demeanor softening as she licked Emily's face. But the moment of relief was short-lived. Emily turned her attention to the cages, where the trapped dogs were still barking and whimpering. "We have to get them out," Emily said, standing up and moving to the nearest cage. She worked quickly, opening the latches and freeing each dog one by one. Hope helped by nudging the frightened dogs toward the barn's entrance, her calm presence reassuring them. As the last cage swung open, the sound of sirens filled the air. Emily's chest heaved with relief as flashing lights illuminated the barn. Lisa and her team arrived, storming the property with law enforcement in tow. Lisa ran toward Emily, her expression a mix of shock and relief. "Emily, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Jake ran off, but we managed to free the dogs." Lisa's gaze shifted to Hope, who stood proudly by Emily's side. "And I'm guessing she had something to do with it," Lisa said, with a small smile. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "She protected me. She's a hero." The officers began rounding up the remaining evidence, and animal control workers gently loaded the rescued dogs into transport vehicles. Lisa promised to track down Jake and ensure he faced justice. Back at Emily's house, the atmosphere was lighter. Hope, Grace, and the puppies lay together on a blanket, their bond stronger than ever. The new dogs Emily had rescued were being cared for by local shelters, but Emily couldn't stop thinking about the journey that had brought her here. As she sat on the floor with Hope, she whispered, "You saved me as much as I saved you." Hope rested her head on Emily's lap, her eyes filled with the trust and love they had fought so hard to earn. This story proves that even in the darkest moments, courage and compassion can shine through. If this story inspired you, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves heartwarming stories like this one. Together, we can make a difference for animals like Hope. Thank you for watching.